And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, with planet.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Fighting downside FTS off. Bring in FTS off. It's orange!
Orange 45! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Look at this!
Put that in the big bag, Jingle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If it was methane, it would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You read? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, no matter where you are in the world. This is Lon Seidman on behalf of NSF, and we are back with Countdown to Launch, because guess what? There's another big launch to be counting down to, and that, of course, is the fourth flight of Starship. And I'm joined today by my good friends, Trevor Sesnick. How you doing, Trevor?
I'm good. As you can see in the top left, we're about 160 hours away from launch, which is kind of makes me nervous since we have a lot of stuff to do, but excited to talk about what's going on with y'all.
Yeah, and this is like the fourth one already. Who's counting, though? But yeah, it's amazing how much smoother this is getting every time. And also joining us is my good buddy Sawyer from Florida, I believe. So how's it going today, Sawyer?
It's going pretty good. Yeah, we've got the two big star countdown, Starliner, and then obviously the one we're here to talk about today, Starship Flight 4. Oh, it's an exciting time, and I love it.
You know what's amazing, and I'd love to get both of your feelings on this. We've seen now Starship launch 3 times, each one amazing, right, and spectacular, and excitement guaranteed, and all that. And it never gets old, does it?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, Falcon 9 launches to me don't get old. So imagine 33 Raptors and just the monstrosity of like the world's most powerful rocket. Yeah, that kind of doesn't get old.
It doesn't, and there's a lot of things that have to happen for this thing to launch. And it's amazing when we come by, when these launches are about to happen, we do all of our analysis. But there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, not only within SpaceX, but also with the U.S. government, because the rocket, of course, is heavily regulated in a whole bunch of different departments across the United States federal government to make sure that everyone on the ground is safe. And I wanted to kick it over to Trevor real quick, because there is, once again, a regulatory review. Flight 3 did not go all the way to plan, although we could definitely argue it was successful in that it did, kind of move the needle forward on getting this system figured out and operating. But there's some interesting things that happened this go around, Trevor, with the FAA, because they're saying there wasn't really any threat to the public this time, which kind of speeds up the process a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, so what happens after any of these flights, we have the FAA works with SpaceX to figure out what happened on this flight, what went wrong, and especially on like flight 1, where there was a danger to the public when the FTS when it activated but didn't destroy the vehicle. The FAA and SpaceX really wants to understand what's going on and how to go about fixing that. So the news that we got from SpaceX and the FAA earlier in the week was since on Flight 3, both vehicles, both the booster and the ship, they had anomalies, right? Booster blew up about 400 meters above sea level, and ship, had attitude problems on orbit, which caused it to fail during reentry. Despite those anomalies, which opened a mishap investigation report, which is still ongoing, SpaceX was like, hey, since both vehicles entered within the predefined corridors that we had talked about, there was no danger to the public at any point. So is it fine if we continue with our launches without finishing Flight 3's mishap investigation? And just yesterday, Adrian for NSF heard from the FAA that FAA said, yep, we agree with this. There was no endangerment to the public from this last launch. So you guys are good to resume launches of the Starship vehicle. However, that does not mean that SpaceX has received their launch license modification. The launch license modification is the last big step remaining from the FAA. We are expecting that probably early next week at this point. Just like on all of the other launches, we expect it to come out, just a day or two before SpaceX's first attempt. There's kind of a saying that the launch license is never late, it's never early, it's always perfectly on time. And we expect that to happen again. So that's the big key item. We are unsure of if the launch license modification will be for just Flight 4 or if SpaceX will be given more launches than that before they need to file for another modification. But this is all great news, because if the FAA wouldn't have agreed with that, we'd probably be looking at a few more weeks until Flight 4. But here we go for in 160 hours or so. And there is the statement that the FAA made to Adrian, highlighting the SpaceX has not received the launch license, but the FAA agreed that Starship may return to flight operations.
And I would guess they still have to finish up all this investigation into what happened in Flight 3 at some point, but it looks like they're willing to forego some of that, at least in the short term, because there was nobody underneath this rocket when it came down, or the two parts of the rocket that happened. This is actually kind of a big deal for the FAA to speed things up a little bit, given how much consternation there was on the first two flights about making sure they met all these milestones. So perhaps, Trevor, this is probably the FAA feeling like they may have a better handle on the hardware, understanding it better? Or perhaps
so first of all, you were correct that the investigation for Flight 3 is still ongoing. SpaceX, right, is leading that investigation, and then they'll submit to the FAA a list of corrective items, just like they did after Flight 1 and Flight 2. But the big difference is, right, that investigation need not be completed and is not completed, yet they're allowed to go ahead. That said, SpaceX has a good understanding of what happened on the last flight. Right, they said that on the booster, the problem was more filtrage blocking in the liquid oxygen tank, causing some of the engines to shut down early. And then on the ship, they lost attitude control, so therefore have added a few more attitude control thrusters. And with those, SpaceX has made modifications to not repeat those incidents, but those haven't been closed out with the FAA. So it's very possible that, maybe they'll find a few other minor things with the FAA that the FAA wants them to change. But thankfully, again, those will all be changes that are made to the Flight 5 vehicle and onward. This really just comes down to SpaceX and the FAA are really starting to understand this launch infrastructure. They are starting to understand, how the vehicle acts during flight, how the vehicle acts on orbit, and that's kind of allowing them to give this, to sign off on. We know that even if something goes wrong on these launches, it's probably not going to be a substantial risk to the public. So therefore, the FAA is fine with this launch attempt going forward.
And sorry, I want to bring you in briefly, just related to this FAA discussion, not so much on the regulatory side, but on the hardware side, because there were things that, as we mentioned earlier, went wrong on this flight. As you were watching it, because now that we have the benefit of hindsight here, we weren't sure when we saw Ship 3 the third flight test take off. We saw a lot of rotation in orbit, which we attributed initially to barbecuing, but that wasn't apparently the plan, was it?
No, it turns out that wasn't the plan. It turns out that, as mentioned, there was some blockage, and they realized that they kind of need more ways to clear the fuel lines, the oxidizer lines there, and make sure that things don't get stuck, as well as adding additional thrust control or maneuvering control while it's up in space, I guess. I almost said orbit, but it's just shy of orbit. So it was definitely not what they expected in that sense. But again, the key takeaway from all of this was the fact that there was absolutely nobody underneath it when this happened. The flight termination system, the FTS, did not activate. So both of those constraints were huge in the FAA saying, all right, we can let those little things slide. Just continue your investigation.
And Trevor, there's nobody underneath it because there are a number of warnings that are made for both the aviation and the marine community to prevent people from being underneath this thing when it goes up, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And we've actually also already started seeing these for Flight 4. So we've seen NOMARs go up for both the entry zone of ship and, of course, the launch corridor. And that's just saying to the boat people, don't be here. This is not a good place to be when there's the largest flying object ever going above you. And then we also, I don't think we have TFRs yet or any NOTAMs, which is notice to airmen. But we expect those very soon. That won't be a holdup. Those just generally kind of come out on schedule.
Right, because we look
And
for
Alex is
the
saying
tea
we do have
leaves, right?
NOTAMs for re-entry and
Okay.
one for Mexican airspace for launch. But yeah, we don't have any for the U.S. Launch airspace yet. And
Right, and those
there's
are some of
the local notice to mariners.
And these are the tea leaves that we look for, because as these notices come out, and then we have the road closures in Texas, so there's a lot of things that we see that kind of give us a hint that things are moving along. And so we're seeing that similar kind of path here being taken. So from the regulatory side here, it sounds like there aren't too many things left here for them to check off to get to launch, which is now, what, about 160 hours away here. So we're making good progress. But we have some hardware to talk about, Sawyer, and I wanted to go to you. And then, of course, we'll take some questions from the chat. We are here for a little bit this afternoon to break down what's going on here. Tell us about the hardware. We have some wet dress rehearsals that have gone on. There's been a lot of activity at Starbase. So what do we got going on down there?
Yeah, exactly. We had the 2 wet dress rehearsals. The first one where apparently something didn't go exactly right. They wanted to do it a second time, and so we got to see that, where they did the second wet dress rehearsal. Everything went great. We know they got down to about what would have been T-minus 10 seconds or so in the countdown, because we did see the detonation suppression system activate. So not the full, upside down rain shower underneath, but at least a kind of FireX type system going on there. So we saw that. We saw them also hold for quite a while. Don't know if that was planned or not, but it's also a good indication that worst comes to worst, if you get to that built-in hold point that they have, which I believe is at T-minus 40 seconds, that they can hold apparently for about a half hour. So we saw that, and we now know that ship 29 is destacked, and we expected that because it still does not have the flight termination system or FTS on it. And to do so, they need to remove it from the booster and then attach it and activate it. In their little FTS bunker that they have, we know that all of the equipment is there. It's just a matter of getting it on and then ahead of launch, getting it armed. That ship as well has done its own testing too. It's already done 2 cryogenic proofing tests. It did 1 spin prime and then 2 static fires, one of which was all 6 engines. And then the other one was the single engine, which was meant to simulate an in-orbit burn, although SpaceX has, or in-orbit deorbit burn, although SpaceX has said there is no planned deorbit burn for this upcoming 4th flight. But everything seems to look pretty good from what we saw, from what they've tweeted out or posted on X. And yeah, at this point, it seems like from the hardware standpoint, the biggest things are the FTS, and there's still some bald spots that need tiles put back on the ship.
And those tiles are always problematic, no matter which generation of space hardware that you talk about. And there are some tea leaves here as well. So in addition to looking at all the regulatory tea leaves, like the NOTAMs and the aviation warnings and everything else, in this case, we have to look for when those explosives get installed. So until that bunker gets emptied out, it looks like we are on the ground for a little bit longer. So what really impresses me about the workflow at Starbase is just how quickly they can stack and destack this system. Is this the fastest that anyone's been able to destack a rocket and restack it at this size ever?
Well, nothing's ever been stacked or destacked at this size to begin
Well, there you
with.
go.
So
Right.
I think it's safe to say yes. But even over time, if you just compare how they've stacked and destacked the vehicle from going all the way back originally to Booster 4 and Ship 20, and then if you want to go into, the first flight test all the way through now, they've gotten so much better and quicker with the chopsticks. It's smooth, seems a lot more automated. At first, it basically seemed like people were manually inching it over or centimetering it over, I guess, depending on where you're from. But yeah, no, they've gotten it down to a science, especially after the last flight when they destacked 7 times and stacked 8 times, but no, it's still impressive how quickly they are able to do it in 45 minutes or so. You can take the vehicle down and then 45 minutes later put it right back together.
And that was one of the things I remember touring the Falcon facility at Cape Canaveral very early on in the SpaceX adventure. And one of the things they were talking about was just how quickly they can roll it out, get it up on the pad, take it back down, and wheel it back in if they have to. And it looks like that same culture of very fast turnarounds is happening here, even with this extremely large hardware. So it's been impressive to see. Let's talk about the heat shield briefly, though, because we do have missing tiles. We did finally see how that heat shield will work in an actual flight, even though the Starship was not kind of orienting itself perfectly. What kind of things did they learn from that first flight and how that heat shield performed?
Yeah, that was one of the things that they kind of mentioned was the fact that they did see orbital re-entry or suborbital reentry. They saw the temperatures climb a little bit higher than expected in certain spots. The fact that it didn't actually hit, heat shield down. So there's still a lot that they need to learn in terms of how well it actually worked, because it was rotating so much that it's not like it was the set kind of tile down position that they were expecting for the entire way. So I don't know if we can say for certain that they learned everything they already need to with the tiles or learned a lot, but it'll be really interesting once they get that control back to see how even that heating ends up. Although I will say I'm impressed at how long it still stayed together, even with all of that spinning, to the point where we could see all of that plasma before we lost contact.
Yeah, Trevor, that was really cool watching that, right? I don't think we've ever seen a live image from re-entry to that level of
No.
detail, right?
That was truly unreal. I remember, right, when we started seeing the little bit of pink, I was like, huh, that's weird. And then it wasn't until there was a little bit more that I'm like, holy cow, we are seeing live views of Starship entering and the plasma around it. That was unreal. And hopefully on Flight 4, this is honestly probably what I'm most excited for, assuming that they maintain attitude again. Hopefully we'll have views all the way down, which would be, the first time ever that a vehicle hasn't gone through a communications blackout. And right, keep in mind, Starship kind of has the inherent advantage that since it's such a massive vehicle, you have 9 meters in diameter, you kind of can peek through with Starlink and TDRS just through, the whatever you want to call the trailing plasma,
right,
behind
like a
the
little
vehicle.
air pocket in there, right? Like it doesn't get hit with the plasma because it's so big, it's going over that section.
Yeah.
It was amazing to
So,
watch.
I'm really hopeful that we get video all the way down. I think Starlink certainly impressed all of us on Flight 1 with its ability to transmit video during hypersonic reentry. So, let's hope that this next flight goes further. And on this next flight, right, keep in mind, the ship is going all the way through reentry, and then they are attempting the landing burn on the ship. So it'll do the kick and burn once again, just like we saw on all of those suborbital hops, which will be amazing. First time it'll be done with Raptor 2, so this will be a very exciting flight.
And that's one of those things that's kind of necessary for getting this rocket back and making it reusable, is that whole maneuver to kick it around and get it to land, or at least control itself into at least in this flight, into a crash into the ocean. Sawyer, what changes are we going to expect with this flight? Are they kind of repeating what was going to happen with the last flight, to have a controlled entry into the ocean?
Yeah, basically, except the main difference is that there's not a planned deorbit burn of any kind. Basically, they're just going to let it coast and then let it try and do the flip and burn, hoping that it makes it through the thicker parts of the atmosphere this time. You will still have the booster doing its simulated landing attempt. Hopefully, they don't lose 6 engines again and can light all 13 of them up that they need to actually slow it down gently. Because technically, it did land in the Gulf of Mexico, just way, way, way too fast for the booster. And same with the ship, just in a lot of pieces and whatever didn't burn up that splashed down. But yes, otherwise the plan is that. And then once they get through, as Trevor mentioned, they will do the flip and burn as we saw during the early SN testing days, hopefully with a nice, soft, gentle water landing.
And if you ever are on a Starship, I guess you would experience this, Trevor, inside of the Starship, the whole flip and burn. You
Yeah,
have to.
I mean, that seems to be what the plan is, that they'll keep the same exact landing profile even on these crewed missions, which that would be quite the roller coaster ride. I don't think the G's would be quite as bad as, it may look like, since the nose cone is much closer to the pivot point, so like your G forces wouldn't be too high, I don't think, but still, that would be an entry like no other for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that's always impressed me in talking to astronauts is just the training that they go through and what happens to your body in space, because there's a lot of different forces, both positive and negative G's, sometimes happening within very short durations. Getting used to gravity once again, it's definitely something you want to.
Or lack of forces.
Or yes, so you definitely want to maybe do a little workout regimen before you get into one of these things. So it'll be there's a lot more to come here, especially as we look at crewed flights. And one of the topics, Sawyer, that's always been very popular regarding Starship, at least since they changed how they do the stage separation, is the hot staging, and this notion of whether or not the hot staging ring is going to be jettisoned in flight here. What can you tell me about that? I know they didn't do it on this past flight, but something did happen.
Right. Right. That's the interesting thing, is that they basically going to take the hot staging ring and at some point jettison it following the stage separation event, as they call it. It's about 30 feet diameter, 6 feet long, and weighs about 20,000 pounds. Apologies for the American units there. But yeah, they're saying that for some missions, it's possible that they would jettison them between 30 and 400 kilometers off the Gulf of Mexico, and not necessarily recover it and kind of let it sink to the bottom, which I know that is the plan for now. And that does raise the question I know a lot of people have been asking, and I've even seen in chat while we've been talking of, wait a minute, that doesn't mean then that this is a fully reusable vehicle, right? If they're jettisoning the hot stage, even if it is only just a small part of the vehicle. So it's going to be interesting to see. And again, as they mention in the documentation that's on screen there, the key word that they have is for some missions. It doesn't say for all or for which ones in particular, but we do know that for Flight 4, the plan is to jettison the hot stage ring.
And what would be the advantage of jettisoning the hot staging ring? Is it just to reduce the amount of weight on the booster as it's coming back down?
I mean, that's one possibility, is the weight. The other possibility may have been that when they were trying to maneuver the vehicle coming back on the last flight, with the added weight of the hot stage ring, it changed the center of mass, and that may have affected how the vehicle flew. So it could be a way to get it back to the way they previously tested it before they realized, hey, we need a hot stage ring, where they had that same sort of center of mass sort of calculations right to make it easier to control. Possibility as well. I know Trevor's more of the type of person when it comes to the engineering side to kind of explain that portion of it, but basically it could have to do with just vehicle proportions.
And Trevor, let me toss that one to you, because this was a component that was not part of, I mean, I guess we can't really say there was an original design, because this is a design process, is actually testing these rockets and adjusting them, but this was a very big addition to what they had designed up to this flight, or that past flight when they used it. Do you think that could be part of it, that it was something that was added on and they had experienced some things they had to expect?
Absolutely. Yes, I think there are probably two reasons. Like, I've seen, some people on X suggesting that they're ditching it to like get rid of the mass and make re-entry less harsh. And I don't think there's anything to that, to be honest. Like, mass is like 9,000 kilograms or something like that, and the booster, I mean, just the engine section of the booster is probably about, 50,000 kilograms, if I had to take a guess, something like that, say 1.5 tons per engine. So I don't think the weight, the pure mass matters at all. I do think there are two things that probably affect it, though. And the first is, like Sawyer was saying, is it's going to move the center of gravity a decent bit up. And that just means that all of the thrust vectors are going to be slightly weird, since you generally want your center of gravity to be low, since that causes the vehicle to be more stable during reentry. And the other big thing is, like Alex was talking about this the other day, and it's a very good point, is that let's go back to Falcon 9, right? They used to have these aluminum grid fins, and those aluminum grid fins were fine even on some of the high heating GTO missions. They kind of got melted, but they would do the job. But then when SpaceX changed the geometry for Falcon Heavy sidecores, right, instead of having the inner stage, they went to that nozzle design, the like cone-ish design. They had to change the grid fins to the titanium ones purely to be able to control the vehicle at all. And that's just because, especially throughout the hypersonic region, it's very hard to get control, and there's some very weird aerodynamic fluid mechanics stuff going on where despite the inner stage / nose cone being above the grid fins, it causes some pretty substantial differences in the way that air flows through them. And I'm not going to pretend I understand what those changes actually are, but it was enough that SpaceX had to add the teeth and go to the slightly larger grid fin design on Falcon Heavy side boosters. The same thing could apply to Super Heavy, where because of the hot staging ring on top, that changes the aerodynamics just enough where they kind of want to just get rid of it for now, and maybe we'll see some changes going forward to those grid fins. And yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, this is very much a prototype vehicle, and long term, SpaceX is definitely not going to want to jettison the hot staging ring. But for now, it's more important for them to just get these vehicles back. And if that means without a hot staging ring, that means without a hot staging ring.
I guess you're still getting most of it back, so that's a win, right? So it's,
yeah.
And Sawyer, this really speaks to, I think, how different SpaceX approaches development versus every other player in this industry, going all the way back, right? They typically, you typically have a design that was very much locked in before you launched anything. Here, it's just a constant state of iterative design as they keep flying them. And I could say same as with Falcon too, right?
Yeah, and I think that all has to do with the fact of the commercial side. Let's say NASA was doing that with SLS, of like, hey, let's try launching it. Oh, it blew up. Let's fix it, because we know it went wrong, and then keep launching every 6 months. I mean, yeah, that would be great, but that's taxpayer money versus something like this, where it's private money, and you kind of have that capability with a little bit less of the risk. Sure, there is NASA money involved, as this is a part of the Artemis program, human landing services, with Starship being the lander for the first and second moon landings. But it's amazing just to see what they're able to do and achieve and change. And keep in mind, this is still an older version now, technically, of the vehicle itself. These were all built before they decided, you know what, let's add the hot staging ring. Elon, in that presentation he gave, I believe it was about a month ago, talking about versions 2 and version 3 that'll eventually be on the way. Those might have it built in at that point. It might have changes to the vehicle design to account for that hot staging ring. So that iterative design will allow them to make changes, but it still blows my mind that they're making these iterative changes to vehicles that they already know are old.
Right, and they're flying them, and then the FAA is okay with all of this, even though every one of them so far has gone kaput in some way or another. So this is what's been so fun about this entire program, is that we're, oftentimes the design of anything, whether it's a car, a rocket, or an airplane, is happening inside of a corporate office and in secrecy. You don't see everything happening. Here it's just happening all out in the open on the side of a road, where we can see these rockets launch and reach various degrees of success, and then come back again and do better the next time. And that brings me to, yes, go ahead.
I think what really highlights just how ridiculously quick moving this program was is today marks the 4-year anniversary of SN4's explosion down on the suborbital tank farm. And that was 4 years ago. SpaceX was still failing to fire a single engine on a vehicle. And now they're already going through, flight with 33 and trying to bring the vehicle back through reentry. So, I mean, if you compare that, frankly, to any other program, the progress that SpaceX has made in 4 years is just crazy. And, you know, SN4 is an entertaining example of it. Here it is, where this is where Jack's famous quote, "If that was methane, it would be igniting in the flare stack," right? Comes from. But this was after a static fire. So just goes to show, you know, it's a very different way of building rockets than what NASA has done, as Sawyer was saying. But it really does allow them to iterate very quickly and get to a place where they just wouldn't be otherwise.
And Sawyer, to some degree, they have to launch these things just to get rid of them because they're cranking them out. Like, how many are sitting on the ground over there already?
I mean, they still have quite a few that are in the bays that they're working on. We already saw, again, there's 31. We saw them testing it despite the electrical spark that little Sparky had over there.
Right, yeah, right.
But you've got all these vehicles still that are out there that will fly, unlike Ship 26, because we don't talk about Ship 26. The worst ship. I mean, what? But yeah, I mean, the fact that they're continuing to fly these older vehicles and make the modifications to them, they're still learning. And that's the beauty of the fact that V2 hasn't flown yet, is you work out all of the kinks from V1, and as you're building the next ones, then you go, oh, okay. So we had this that we learned, we had that we learned. And sure, they seem like kind of temporary fixes for now, like a jettisonable hot stage ring, but in the end, they'll lead to a more, I guess, sustainable is the word, maybe, fleet of vehicles.
Right, as they iterate, right, and that, again, that hot staging ring was not something they thought they needed, and then it turned out they did, so that'll certainly set up. So let me get some questions here from the chat. I've been queuing up a few, but this is our standard one that I think is always worth mentioning each time we do this show. Let me get some assessments here as to how far we are going to get into this launch. Are we going to get all the way to flip, or do you think we'll just get to re-entry? Let me start with Trevor. I don't know if Kevin still has the fight bell backstage there, but that would be
I'm expecting Ship to survive re-entry, right? They've done a lot of work on the heat shield. The heat shield looks very, very good compared to every other one that they've flown. And especially since they're able to make it through, you know, a decent bit of re-entry with the vehicle just in the completely wrong orientation, where there was plasma on bits of the vehicle that there was never designed to have plasma near. It was impressive. So I'm expecting Ship to make it through re-entry. I don't know if I think the flip and burn is going to work, right? They've never done that with Raptor 2, and they had problems with that on every single SN hop, where either, you know, they would have some anomaly. Even on SN15, where they successfully landed, they posted, a few years later, just a few months ago, that they had pressure problems as well. And that's the same thing that we saw in SN8. And then, of course, SN10 had the problem with ingesting helium. So I'm not super optimistic about that part. But then again, SpaceX has had several years to get better at that. And then booster, I'm expecting probably a few engine failures during the last part of landing burn, but that it's probably a mostly soft booster splashdown.
In terms of booster, I think they're going to be able to do it with this one. I think they're going to have the soft touchdown. If anything, it would maybe lose an engine or two, but I think they've got that part kind of worked out, and I think it helps that they have some experience as well with Falcon 9. As for the ship portion of it, I think it's going to make it through re-entry. It seems like they've added enough to keep the attitude correct. The biggest question is going to be how well those heat shield tiles hold up and if they stay. And as long as those heat shield tiles stay on as well as it seems like they will, then I think they'll be able to make it through. I'm hoping they're able to make it through. As for the flip maneuver, that would just be an added bonus. And I guess technically, if we didn't see SN11, it didn't blow up then, right? Technically? So that one didn't have any issues, wink, nudge?
And those heat shield tiles are pretty pesky. And we saw a lot of them flying off of the last go around with the third flight test. So keeping them on, I think, would be a victory there. And Sawyer, the flip maneuver, a lot of that involves making sure your fuel isn't sloshing around too much, right? Because that's been an ongoing challenge for these maneuvers.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that they've worked out over those SN tests in the earlier days, and hopefully have continued to. As we know, they successfully also even did an in-orbit fuel transfer during the previous flight, which, I mean, that's more for fuel transfer when it comes to the lunar landing. But still, I think they've gotten much better at understanding the fluid dynamics inside of the vehicle. And I think it was really going to come down to how many of the tiles will hold up through re-entry. And that, I think, is going to be the deciding factor. And, I mean, it seems like a lot of the tiles stay on through launch, at least. So you got that going for you,
That's a
which
victory,
is nice.
right?
But yeah, it's really going to come down to the adhesive sticking through the heat.
Right. And do you need all the tiles?
No, and I mean, Shuttle was the perfect example of that. Sorry it took 40 minutes to mention Shuttle. But there are plenty of missions where it lost tiles, but it's a matter of where it loses the tiles. There are certain parts that are a lot more mission critical that if they were to get hot or to melt the body underneath, that you would have an issue. So in this case, it's probably the same deal. If you're going to lose, 5 tiles and they're kind of scattered all around, that's not a big deal. If you lose 5 tiles around a major weld joint or something and it gets super hot, then maybe it's a different story.
And one of the things that I was really surprised about, I got to see, I think, Shuttle Atlantis in its preparation for its final mission, or her final mission, I should say. And looking underneath, each tile had a little circle with a little tiny hole where I guess they would inject a chemical to prevent moisture buildup inside of the tile. Obviously, in Texas, we get a lot of humidity there as well. Is that a concern? Do they have to do the same kind of treatment there, Sawyer, or we're not sure about that?
I believe they're treated, but it's a different type of tile. You've got that they're using with the tough rock versus the silica-based tiles that we saw with Shuttle. But yes, a lot of the Shuttle tiles actually had the waterproofing built in. And so if you saw those circles on the tiles underneath a Shuttle, that meant that tile had previously flown and they re-injected the material that was actually used to help waterproof it while it was on the ground, considering that a lot of it would kind of basically burn up on re-entry as planned. So, fun fact, any of those circle tiles were previously flown tiles, but I believe that's built into the tough rock design.
Interesting. I got some great pictures. I'll have to show them to you one day of what I saw underneath there. And they were telling us how they had to clear the place out for 2 weeks because the stuff was toxic. It was a whole big to do, and just shows you how hard it is to make space flight a reusable exercise. It's not just like landing an airplane. Even the tires had to be replaced with each landing. So, hey, we got a great website you should all check out called nextspaceflight.com, and we have Starship kind of on there as a trackable item with a number of checklist items, so you can see how close we are getting to launch. And here it is on screen. My screen's over here, which is why I'm looking in the wrong direction here. But as you can see, we've got a checklist there of all the things that have to happen before this rocket takes off. Oh, there we go. He reoriented me properly. So as you can see, we have check marks next to the wet dress rehearsal and the road closures. We have the notice to air mission in Mexico, but there's still a few items that have yet to come, including that FAA launch license. And this is a great place just to keep track of what's going on with the next mission. But also, you can see what else is launching, because there's stuff launching every couple of days now. It used to be like a once a quarter kind of event. Now we've got launches constantly to keep track of. And I know, I come on, not as much as you two do, but Trevor, how hard is it to keep up with all this in spaceflight right now? It's insane how much is going
on. It really is. Right. I have my own databases and sheets to keep track of everything, and I've been falling behind on some of my sheets, mainly because I'm trying to replace the functionality entirely with code. But it is a lot to keep up with. But we're all here for it. Like, it just asks Sawyer. He gets to see a launch every 2-3 days on average now out of the Cape, and I can't imagine they're getting boring.
No, they're definitely not boring. And I mean, I'm about 150 miles south for most of them. I do go up for some of the larger launches. But even just seeing it in the backyard doesn't get old.
You know, it's funny, sir, because I visit an area not far from where you are, and I was really amazed by how visible the launches are, even that, further down south. I saw one night, I think there was that night we had the Falcon Heavy and a regular Falcon doubleheader, and it was amazing just how much is visible. And then I was in the Bahamas a few months ago, and I got to see one coming back down too. So it's crazy, just the volume there. And one of the things that when I last saw you was when we were there for, I think, Crew 7, the Crew 7 launch, when we were getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, but I had your bug spray.
Which is normal. Yeah. Oh, yes. The Sawyer bug spray.
It would have been far worse without the Sawyer bug spray. But I was just looking at my field of view where I had, a rocket with astronauts on it about to take off in front of me. And then we had 2 others just on the pad and ready to go at Cape Canaveral Air Station as well. And it's just amazing to see how far things have come, both for government launches, but also just the commercial industry. It's pretty crazy. So
yeah,
lots
Space
going
Force
on.
Station over there, always busy. And again, the fact that now we've got those, I think we have 8-4 on the books. So hopefully Bahamas landings coming up. And then, yeah, in terms of where you were, fun fact, that's where I actually, sorry, 8-5, excuse me, corrected by Alex. And I should have seen that on Next Spaceflight. But yeah, no, you and I watched from the exact same spot, it turns out, quite often there, where you were. And yeah, it's still unbelievable how much is launching. So it's so cool, whether it's Crew or just all of these not your ordinary Starlinks. It's great.
And it's great for NSF and our fans because we all have stuff to gather around and talk about, which is awesome. And you know what else you can gather around with is your other friends who aren't following spaceflight, and teach them about it, because you'll have some conversation starters over at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And there we've got our complete selection of merch, including some new patches that I believe, there they are. Yep, so we've got a whole bunch of stuff, including our L2 membership, so you can get behind the scenes here a little bit with us. Look at that. This is our 4th flight test patch. High resolution, high definition embroidery. And so you can add this to your flight jacket and talk to your friends about it, because these are great conversation starters. What's that patch all about? Well, let me tell you. And then they'll tune in. And once they see one launch, that's it. I know for me, the first launch I saw in person, that was all it took. And so you can definitely get going there. And there you go. You got some
I'll
t-shirts.
highlight, I believe we've already sold 60% or something like that of the flight patches. So if you want one, get one soon.
Yeah,
they are selling out quick, and we're not getting another batch. When they're out, and we are not selling them anymore.
A limited time offer, and you can get it on all sorts of other stuff, as you can see there, mugs and t-shirts and lots of other neat things there. So lots of cool stuff over there, including the metal prints that our NSF team put together. And what's crazy, those metal prints sometimes are available like just minutes after launches too. So it's amazing how quickly these things can go. So
and high quality posters too for those too.
That's right. Get them on your wall there. Another, again, lots of great conversation pieces. So, hey, we got some people to thank here in the support queue. So we got a bunch of new members here, including Spaceflight Explained. We also have Daniel Hogman, who gifted 5 Red Team memberships, along with Apocalypse Cow. It's always good to see familiar faces doing some generous membership donations. Eric Frazier with 1 Red Team membership. And we also have a super chat here from Snorkers, who agrees with Chandler. I'm not sure which one of you is Chandler, that the Starship landing attempt is important. SpaceX did 1 successful flip and burn before apparently acting like they nailed it. So that's a good point there, Sawyer.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, SN15 was the one that stuck the landing, and as Trevor mentioned, now we're learning is, there were still issues with it. I think we all kind of expected at least 1 or 2 more flip and burn type tests after SN15, but no, they've just been doing their thing, and I think it's going to come down to the exact same thing we were talking about earlier with the iterative design of let's flip and burn the Raptor 2s, as we know how they kind of worked with the V1s, and whatever happens or doesn't happen, that's what we put into the next flight.
And that's it. It's just getting to that point,
really,
Trevor, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really bummed, to be honest, that there weren't more of the suborbital hops, just because they were so cool, and I mean, I don't really think we're ever going to see something like it again. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's very SpaceX too. Once they figured out, yes, this is possible, and they did it on SN15, to move on and be like, okay, we can continue working on this later, but we really just need to start getting the orbital launch mount done as quickly as possible. And right, that was a pretty big project. That right, there weren't flights for what I think almost 2 years from SN15 to Starship flight orbital flight 1. So it's obviously a huge project. I think SpaceX probably made the right decision, but yeah, it's definitely sad that we never got to actually see another one of those during the
So,
suborbital hops.
yeah, no, when hop, still waiting. When hop.
I mean, I guess this next launch is like a really high altitude suborbital hop.
I would say
Touche.
it could pass for that, and it's really a matter of getting it to that point, right? So everything's got to work. But I think, sorry, what we've seen is that each launch gets a little bit further, right? So the first one, we destroyed the launch pad. Not most, but a good number of the engines didn't work too well. But it was amazing how much had improved by the second flight, and certainly the third flight, where there was a lot more control. So it's like inching forward. And I guess if we had more of a window into Falcon development, we probably would have seen something similar.
Probably. I mean, yeah, we went from Flight 1, launching with 3 engines out and continuing to lose them, to 2 flights now in a row, knock on wood, that all 33 engines lit and stayed lit through the launch, which still boggles my mind that it did that on the second and third try. But yeah, I mean, we saw, even just going back to Falcon 1, it took them 4 tries to finally say, hey, this is somewhat plausible, we can do it. And then their goal after that was to move on to have 2 vehicles, Falcon 1 and Falcon 5. Not many people remember there was a Falcon 5 originally planned, and then their big lifter was eventually going to be Falcon 9. They obviously skipped Falcon 5 and went right to Falcon 9, but they learned a lot from those early days as well. So I think it's kind of that same thing of, we don't have the SNs anymore. It's obviously different versions now of the Raptors that we're going to see on this one, but it's still based off of that early tech still.
And let me ask this question, because we still see this in use a lot with other launchers, which are solid rocket boosters. Maybe we'll start this off with Trevor here. So Galadriel Squirrel in our chat was wondering, why are they not using solids to maybe make things a little simpler? I think I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, just solids go against SpaceX's entire ideology, which is they want everything to be testable and rapidly reusable. Solids are not very testable, right? You can't fire it on the ground and then go fire it on a vehicle, since you would have burned up all of your propellant. Whereas a liquid engine, you can test on the ground, even if it is more complex. And then, of course, there's a part that SpaceX wants to be able to land this vehicle and within an hour launch it again. And that's just not going to be possible with solids, since you have to put all that sludge in again, and you can't reuse them at all, not even if you recover the casings. So it's just not SpaceX's way, and SpaceX has never used a solid core. There was nothing on Falcon 1, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, or Starship that's solid, and I don't think they ever will.
The only thing that's solid is their record right now. Sorry.
You are a master, Sawyer. You are a master at this. The one thing about solids too, as a one-time attempted launch photographer, is that they leave a lot of residue on your camera lenses too. I'm sure you've experienced that, Sawyer.
Yeah, don't touch them afterwards without gloves. The funny thing is, I told that to a whole bunch of people at the last Atlas launch that had the solids. I was like, careful, don't touch with your hands right after. Wear some gloves, because your fingers will get quite tingly. Guess who forgot to wear gloves when they went to go pick up their own cameras then? So, yeah, tingle fingers it was.
Well, funny story, my family's business used to be a glove company. We actually imported gloves, and I never had gloves around here, ever, even though I had a whole family business full of them. So it's how it goes, you can never prepare too much there. And you know what, Sawyer, like the environmental hazards of solid rockets are significant, aren't they? Because it's dropping this stuff that's making your fingers tingly all over the ground.
I mean, yeah, it's better than I think it has been. Um, they keep that in mind, but yeah, when you've got, I believe, what was it, aluminum perchlorate and all these other terrible things that seem to be in there. But then again, that's what we've been using. That's what works. That's part of the beauty of with shuttle. If you took a look at the way that it burned, the solids, yeah, they had the big giant cloud. They were super bright. You could barely see the shuttle engines because they burned so clean because that was hydrogen and oxygen. And what's the byproduct if you get H2 and O? You get water. So that was
Water.
basically the byproduct was water on it. Yeah. So it doesn't seem like Starship will fly with anything solid on it like Starliner, say, is going to fly with solids.
And here's another question from another squirrel. There's a lot of squirrels in our chat. It must be a thing. Fluff Squirrel is wondering, how many times can the parts be reused after a flight? Now, Trevor, we're seeing Falcon usage go up and up. Now we've got, what, boosters that have done 20, 21 flights? So I'm
21,
guessing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, right, this is something that SpaceX doesn't know yet, since they haven't recovered
Right,
a
they haven't
single one
gotten
of
them
these
back.
vehicles.
Right.
As you were saying with Falcon, we've seen up to 21 flights on the booster, and I believe 16 flights of a fairing half, and they're currently in the certifying process to get that up to 40, is their eventual goal. And then with Dragon, I believe we've seen up to 5 flights of the same spacecraft, and I think SpaceX wants to also get that up to like 10 or 20. So yeah, it's awesome that reuse is a thing now. Like, right, even in this weekend's Starliner launch, that's a reused spacecraft. It flew on the OFT-1 mission, and we actually just got confirmation that Starliner is go for launch on June 1st following the Delta FRR, which was completed today. And for those who may not know, the Delta FRR is it's a secondary flight readiness review saying the changes, the delta, since the first flight readiness review is the things that they look at in this one. So that's some exciting news for where you can kind of see on the spacecraft section in that photo that there's a little bit of scorch marks from the first flight. So we really are living in the age of reuse, which is a very, very good thing.
Good old
Certainly a lot more
Calypso.
efficient.
And I tried to make the transition there, but yeah. Calypso is the name of the spacecraft, by the way, that, yes, flew on the orbital flight test, which originally didn't have a number until they had to fly the second orbital flight test, so they renamed it OFT-1 afterwards. But yeah, and we, sounds like they've had the issues worked out with the valves. It sounds like they've got the issue worked out that they had with whatever was going on with the leak, and that it's within acceptable ranges in the service module segment. So June 1st it is.
And Mr. Banana here is wondering, Starliner first or Starship first? So Trevor, it looks like it might be Starliner, provided all goes well.
Yeah, provided the schedule holds. Starliner is currently June 1st, I believe 12:25 p.m. local time. So that would be ahead of Starship, which is currently no earlier than June 5th, pending regulatory approval. It's very possible that Starship, moves back a day or two. I imagine the schedule is quite tight given with the regulatory side and the hardware stuff that they have to complete. However, we're looking at a Starship launch that is in under 160 hours is the current net date. But of course, subject to change. This is spaceflight.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Don't
and Mother Nature too. Don't forget, you got weather to deal with too.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got obviously Florida weather, where if you don't like the weather, you wait 5 minutes, especially as we get towards summer with the random summer storms. And then out in Texas, same thing. Had the crazy storms that were rolling through earlier today. You've got weather definitely to always contend with too.
And that was Patrick Lambert's question here. What's the weather going to look like?
Yeah. I think we're too far out to start answering that yet. I haven't seen any attempts at looking at weather yet. I would imagine, right, come back. I believe the next countdown to launch is on Saturday, and then we'll have a much better idea of how weather is looking for launch. I'm actually not sure what like typical Starbase weather is this year. I think we're kind of in the season of foggier mornings, but I could be wrong. I'm not entirely sure.
One thing's for sure, it's hot.
That
It is
is
always
true.
hot.
Yeah.
Yes, and speaking of hot, we have a super chat question from Paul Dawson. Maybe I'll toss this one over to Sawyer, because we talked a little bit about a missing tile, or how many would be missing. Stainless steel has a pretty high melting point of 2550 to 2650 degrees Fahrenheit, according to Paul here. So is the actual stainless steel itself helping with some of those heat issues, in addition to obviously having the tiles on there?
I mean, the entire vehicle isn't covered in heat shield tiles, so there's kind of your answer right there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are parts that are definitely going to experience heating, even if it's not the part that's directly smacking into the atmosphere. That's the part where you see the heat shield tiles. As for the rest of it, yeah, it's still going to get hot. It's going to deal with those temperatures. And as mentioned, stainless steel can handle a lot of that. Just like, I'm sorry, I keep bringing up shuttle, but that's my heritage. How parts of it were, the reinforced carbon-carbon for the worst of it. You had the black silica tiles. Some of them had white tiles. And then you also had thermal blanket.
I was about to ask about the thermal blanket. Yep, because they don't have a thermal blanket on Starship. Right.
No, you don't really need it because, again, as mentioned, you've got the stainless steel.
So there's a benefit to the material here. So that's a good answer to the question there. Brown Paper Bag wants to know with the super chat, who is driving the rocket on the next flight? So I believe it drives itself.
It doesn't use Tesla autopilot, at least that we know of, thankfully. So pedestrians are safe. But
Starship autopilot.
Yeah,
I've been driving. I drive around.
It's all computers.
My car drives me around all the time. It's actually working pretty good around here, so it's been pretty cool. I want to thank SpamBot, who spammed 5 Red Team memberships to other folks here in the NSF community. So thank you very much for that. Bidford also 5 Red Team memberships, and also looking like people are picking up patches and stuff in the store. So it's great to see everyone taking advantage of that. So. We've got some fun stuff happening here. So let's, as we're getting ready to close out in a few minutes, Trevor, what's the prediction here? What do we expect to see between now and our next Countdown to Launch show?
Yeah. So as we were mentioning earlier, and as the next spaceflight Starship section highlights, there are a few things left on the regulatory side. So we need the TFRs to go up in the United States. We need an evacuation notice, and then we need the launch license. We're not expecting the launch license until early next week. It could very well come out later this week, but just personally, we're kind of thinking based on previous schedules is probably next week. So that won't be out by the next countdown to launch probably, but there's a very good possibility that we'll start seeing those TFRs and maybe even possibly the evacuation notice, which we will probably learn about from NSF's Mary. So then on the hardware side of things, we expect work to keep being done to the ship, probably close out that heat shield. I think there's a little bit of testing left that they want to do. And then, as we said, I think there's still a few missing tiles that they want to install. And then, of course, the big watch item that we'll have will be for that flight termination system install, which really could happen like any day at this point. I suspect probably this weekend-ish is when they'll start installation of it. I feel like that would most closely align with timelines that we've seen for previous missions. But aside from that, we are very close to launch, and hopefully by Saturday we'll have a very good idea of if that Wednesday launch date is going to hold, or if it's possible that it'll move a day or two.
All right. And Sawyer, what do you think? Anything more to add on that?
I hope that Starliner launches between now and our Saturday one. But that's just me selfishly, since I will be there at the Cape along with the team, bringing it to you live. But no, I mean, that's going to be the most of it. And then just the excitement and seeing as we get closer, see more and more people down at Starbase, see the excitement rise. And I mean, the moment we get that word that, hey, the regulatory approval has come through, It's going
Right.
to be bunkies.
And the hotel fills up quick, so book your flight while you can. And yeah, and it's what's so amazing about all of this is that, you know, where this is headed is that this is going to be, you know, not quite the schedule at your local airport, but this is going to be something that over time we'll see as frequently as these Falcon 9s and all these other rockets taking off from your neck of the woods coming back. I mean, it's going to be there's going to be so much more to talk about here, and there's so many more milestones that they have to get to that I think will be keeping us busy for quite a while. So we will be back. We're keeping a close eye on things. So Countdown to Launch is where you can come to get the latest news as we get it here at NSF. And I want to thank Trevor and Sawyer today for joining us and helping me and all the viewers understand what's going on here. Let me check and see if we've got, it looks like we're cleared out of the support queue here, so that's good. I want to thank everyone who made a contribution today. We also want to thank our members, and we have many members. In fact, every time we do one of these streams, we get like 15, 20, 30 new members. So you can see what some of the members are there. You can see a long list of names of people that have become launch directors and flight engineers. We got a few backstage listening to us right now, as a matter of fact, getting the behind the scenes on everything that goes on at NSF. Thank you again to both of you. Also, Dave for camera and Starbase ops, excuse me, and Kevin behind the scenes, and Kevin's behind the scenes making everything work for us as always. And Ship 26 is the best. That's what I was told to say. Is that no? Okay. So
why'd you play the video, Kevin? Why?
Somebody's leading me astray here, but I'm a robot that it says thanks Ship 26, so I am thanking Ship 26. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this episode of Countdown to Launch, and we will be back very soon with another update. So stay tuned, and on behalf of Sawyer and Trevor, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned here on NSF. There's all sorts of stuff going on, including our live streams, so don't miss it. See you in a little bit.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, Atlantic.
Water towers fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside FTS off. Bring in FTS off. It's orange! 145! Oh my god! Oh my god! Décollage! Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
This methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You good? Sure. We don't need any more of these.